Good morning. I'm Reverend Theresa Rohlck, the Minister of Pastoral Care here at the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. Thank you each for being present today as we celebrate the life of Arden Mahlberg. When someone within our circle of connection dies, we gather in community to grieve, to remember, and to celebrate a life we were connected to. We gather in show of support for each other, and particularly for Arden's family. We welcome the comfort that comes from being together. Each of you come to this gathering with your own faith or personal beliefs that are sustaining and comforting. Today, in this space, we recognize the diversity of experiences you each bring with you and know that you are welcome here, just as you are. You may have picked up a small stone as you entered the sanctuary. Please hold on to it during the service and let it absorb any sadness and grief that may arise. We will use the stone later as part of a ritual. If you did not get one and want one, please raise your hand and we'll bring one to you now. In the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we begin gatherings by lighting a chalice. The chalice flame is a reminder that there is an everlasting spark of love, some say the spark of the divine, within each of us. The flame reminds us that we aspire to bring our best selves to whatever is at hand, something Arden did consistently. I'd like to invite Rachel and Alma and Nathaniel to come up and help us light the chalice today. And as they do that, we will say together the chalice lighting words that this congregation uses, remembering that Arden found a spiritual home here after he and Linda moved to Ann Arbor. The words are printed in the order of service, and all of you are welcome to join us. As we say together, we light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. Thank you. Today, we will celebrate Arden's life through words and music and ritual offered by friends and family. But we also have Arden's own words, his poetry, and his music that provide us a fuller picture of who he was and what he believed in. For over 20 years, Arden met monthly with a group of colleagues who were invested in spirituality and mental health and wanted to share books and readings on these issues in order to gain more depth of understanding. Now, members of that group made a video of their remembrances, and I'll read a transcription of a few of them during the service, starting with this one. I so appreciated Arden's depth of thought and willingness to tackle hard issues and move away from things he had believed or not known in order to gain more insight, specifically with Indigenous peoples' history and trauma, especially around land rights. He always had a different slant or interesting question on anything we brought up for reading. This is so very true. One thing Arden told me was that it was important for those here today to know and remember that we are gathering on land that is not our own, but land that was taken from the native people who have been here for centuries. We acknowledge that we gather on the land of the Anishinaabe peoples, home of the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe tribes. Arden was a prolific writer, and many poems reflected directly on his relationship with the natural world. One of his more recent poems was inspired specifically by the rivers and lakes around his home in Dexter. This is called Thanks for the Last Time. When I first heard the idea that you can't step twice in the same river, I thought, okay, what's the big deal? Now maybe I love life more. I eat more slowly to prolong the enjoyment. I want to hear the same song over again. Try as I mindfully might, I can't absorb it all. Sometimes I just want to walk the creek I've walked before, just because I loved it so much last time. I seek to re-experience how it was before, but it has always changed. The creek doesn't flow or sound the same. We must get reacquainted. Every paddle on the river, every stroke upon the lake, every conversation, always new. If only memory were a fixed thing, but it is fluid too. We can't step twice into the same memory. Tack för sist, the Swedes say. Thank you for the last time. So tack för sist, dear creek. Thank you for the last time. Now let's see how we are today. I'm certain you also hear the poignancy of this poem as we read it today, the double meaning of the words, thank you for the last time, thank you for the last time. I don't know for certain if, when Arden wrote this, he anticipated it as a final thank you or not, but knowing his facility with words and ideas, I rather suspect he did. The next reading was one of his favorites. It's called Sometimes by an anonymous Ojibwe poet, in the English version by Robert Bly and Francis Denmore. Sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the while I am being carried on great winds across the sky. Let me read that again. Sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the while I am being carried on great winds across the sky. May we each have as much awareness as Arden had of the majesty of his life journey, of this life journey that we are on, of being carried on great winds. Now here's another remembrance from someone in his book group. When I first met Arden, I found him intimidating and very cerebral. But as I got to know him, I found him to be very gentle and kind, and I loved his reading choices. I was impressed that he was willing to take on some indigenous land issues with his church in Madison. He wrote a very thoughtful article surrounding these issues, which I shared with my Native community. I thought it was so wonderful he attended the Parliament of World Religions on more than one occasion and was so open to others' religious and spiritual beliefs. He was bright, well-read, and a wonderful therapist who I would have chosen for my own therapist. Somehow I felt a closeness to him as he walks on. Now, Arden also felt drawn to spiritual writings and ideas beyond the Western canon, beyond Christianity, beyond Unitarian Universalism. The next reading is a poem by Kabir, who was a 15th century poet and saint from northern India. I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. You don't grasp the fact that what is most alive of all is inside your own house. And so you walk from one holy city to the next with a confused look. Kabir will tell you the truth. Go wherever you like, to Calcutta or Tibet. If you can't find where your soul is hidden, for you, the world will never be real. So I mentioned that Arden not only wrote poetry, but also music. This next song is very special to the family. You should have a handout with the words and the music. And as you can see, it was written for his granddaughter, Alma. What a treasured gift to have a song written just for you by your grandfather, excuse me. And what a treasured gift it is that you, Alma, are sharing your song with us today. Thank you. So Allison will play it through once so you can hear how the melody goes, and then we'll sing together. We'll sing verses 1 and 2, followed by the refrain, and then verses 7 and 8 with the refrain. Okay? Verse 1. Love says, open your eyes. Love says, open your eyes. And as I do, I notice darkness. And as I do, I see radiance too, like nothing I've seen before. Verse 2. Love says, open your ears. Love says, open your ears. And as I do, I notice crying. And as I do, I hear laughter too, like nothing I've heard before. What is it about love? What is it about love? It opens us up to everything that's universal love. Verse 7. Love says, open your mind. Love says, open your mind. And as I do, I learn what's dishonest. And as I do, I learn what's true too, like nothing I've seen before. Verse 8. Love says, open your wings. Love says, open your wings. And as I do, I fly with angels. And as I do, I am centered and true. I know that I've been before. What is it about love? What is it about love? It opens us up to everything that's universal love. Please take time later to read all the verses Arden wrote, expressing the both and understanding of this world, how contradictory feelings can coexist. Today we feel both sorrow and joyfulness. Today we experience both crying and laughter. But love opens us up to everything, he says, and I feel that right here in this space there is a universal love present for Arden, for each other, and for this beautiful world we are part of. One more remembrances from a book club member. I got to know Arden while working with students from the Wartburg Seminary. I thought at first he had been a minister. Our group met for a long time at his office, which I always found to be a lovely, peaceful place to meet. Getting to know Arden was like unraveling a beautiful ball of yarn, because he was very self-contained, not solemn, but serious, with endless ideas and connections. His reactions to our discussions were often unanticipated and challenging, but always respectful and insightful and warm. The next reading is by one of Arden's favorite writers, Robert Bly. It's called A Poem in Three Parts. Oh, on an early morning, I think I shall live forever. I am wrapped in my joyful flesh as the grass is wrapped in its clouds of green. Rising from a bed where I dreamt of long rides past castles and hot coals, the sun lies happily on my knees. I have suffered and survived the night, bathed in dark water, like any blade of grass. The strong leaves of the box elder tree, plunging in the wind, call us to disappear into the wilds of the universe, where we shall sit at the foot of a plant and live forever, like the dust. I'd like to invite Arden's dear friend, Paul Anderson, to offer his remembrance now.
Nathaniel, Nora, thanks for having me. Unwanted call. As if I had not heard, a tear runs into my ear. It's gone into his liver. His organs are shutting down. Not much time. Drops bounce off well walls, echo. He's dying, he's dying, he's dying. Until the words are lost and end in plop. Arden and I have had a deep, joyful relationship for nearly 60 years. So I know that he would appreciate this rather stark merger of his death with the universal. We were assigned roommates our freshman year of college. He was from a town of about 10 to 12,000. I was from one of about 30,000, but more realistically, of about 800, that of my father's congregation. So without any effort on his part, Arden became a mentor to me, someone who would broaden my contact with the world, take me out of the insular and introverted life I had lived to that point. Some of it was the simple introduction to companionship, some to the Tom Sawyer side of late teenage life, some to the constant exchange of ideas. As you all know, Arden was a tenacious and rigorous interrogator of life. And soon I would join him, knives sharpening knives. We played Go through to sunrise, surrounded by others of an off-campus colony of misfits. We would become immersed in civil rights efforts and opposition to the Vietnam War. At one point, our Students for Democratic Society organization, the Daffodils, occupied the administration building, forcing a vote on ROTC. Falling one vote short the evening before the secret war in Cambodia was revealed. He and I were becoming a third person, Arden and Paul, two different people forming a collective self. We maintained this through our post-college years of community and anti-war activism in the Minneapolis area. First, as part of a small collective formed by a Lutheran minister and state congressman. Christos community was where Arden and I became trainers in nonviolent action, bringing our trainees into the streets with street theater against the war and other issues. Over time, we were hired by the American Friends Service Committee. Our training as nonviolent activists soon included a network of people capable of responding to potential violent hotspots at a moment's notice. In 1973, this found the two of us on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation as intermediaries between the American Indian Movement occupation of Wounded Knee and the surrounding federal marshals. We also had to use our skills to engage the goon squad of the corrupt tribal council. This may be where Arden's deep interest in the source of colonialism in the Christian church arose. But just imagine Poverty all around, late spring snows, sitting in the cold wet, gunships circling above the nearest phone booth while you made calls, and Roberta Flack's hit of the summer, Killing Me Softly, was playing through the car door. Perhaps one of our last efforts together as political activists was the planning and execution of a 400-mile peace march into the western hinterlands of Minnesota, each day speaking in churches or the proverbial town square. And then this was not the case. Arden was studying Jungian psychology, and I was beginning to practice Zen and write poetry. The last place we lived together was in a fourplex, which was so full of light and bright yellow carpeting that we had to discuss whether or not we could stand it. Here Linda comes into his life. She was a nurse in the nursing home, and Arden the janitor. Obvious pairing. Thereafter, multiple changes of place and activities, the acquisitions of families, we managed to be in touch and maintain intellectual rigor and elan at the last via regular Zoom calls until Arden could not concentrate. Think providing counseling for particularly menacing Scriabin piano pieces. If you say you don't believe in God, which God is that? The nature of boundaries, patenting freeze-dried tofu, whether one could transfer allegiance from the Packers to the Lions now that they know how to win. Nathaniel made the unwanted call. When Nathaniel made the unwanted call, I immediately wanted to chivvy everyone and everything to their best being. Drunkards, butterflies, the deer over the fence, the unused road, whatever. Be your best while Arden dies. Suzuki Roshi wrote, "When effort is practiced wholeheartedly, it is like a good bonfire that burns itself out completely, leaving no trace." This is Arden. I'm still not ready to change the present tense for the past. Now we have the present absence, and this is huge and active for us. Arden made this possible. His is a great death. After the storm, the crow returns to its branch, but it is not there.
Now we'll hear remembrances from Arden's children, Nora and Nathaniel.
I had a really hard time figuring out what I wanted to talk about during this service. Since my dad died, I've heard a lot from many of you and from others with thoughts and memories and appreciations about my dad. And I've come to see many aspects I didn't know about him. I've seen him in different contexts and in different relationships that I wasn't privy to. And it made me really reflect and think about him in a new light and my relationship with him and my memories about him, because you can really never know everything about someone. As my dad, he obviously had a really big impact on my life. But as I've thought about him, and what did I want to focus my remarks on today, and really the through line that came out to me was that my dad lived his life doing the right thing. Even if that was difficult to do, even if that was unpopular, or meant speaking truth to power, or even if it would cause him personal hardship. You can see this in so many examples of his life, many things that have already been talked about this morning. And probably most prominently, what Paul talked about, his decision to be a conscientious objector in the social justice work he did during that time, and the path that took him down in life. But before I ever knew that about my dad, or was ever conscious about values or living your values, I remember him sharing with Nathaniel and I that he would never turn patients away because they weren't able to pay. He would always work with people to come up with some sort of arrangement that they could afford, and even if that sometimes meant accepting in-kind payments like a soup pot. And I don't think he shared this as a way of being boastful or very intentionally trying to impart some values on his children, and he really never did that. He just shared it in a matter-of-fact way. But I could tell even as a kid that this was something that was really important to him, that he would do that. He recognized that he provided an essential service that could help people live happier and more fulfilling lives. He knew that. And he believed very fundamentally that that should be available to everyone and wasn't just reserved for the wealthy. And that really struck me as a kid. Even at a young age, I knew that this was important, and that what he was doing was important, and that him sharing that information with Nathaniel and I was important. And as I've reflected about this as an adult, it's really remarkable to me how much that has permeated into Nathaniel and my lives as well. But there's another very important aspect about how my dad lived his life. And this is really an important part in striving to do the right thing, and that is that my dad was a seeker. He was dynamic. He was a voracious reader and writer. He loved conversation and debate. And importantly, he was intellectually honest. If he was presented with something that forced him to reckon with a belief that he held that was in conflict, he would wrestle with it. He would change his mind or expand his knowledge or understanding about something. And he didn't fall into the trappings of the typical philosophy major, because while he had this rich interiority, while he would constantly grapple with things and ideas and concepts, he tied that interiority with action. Armed with a new insight or knowledge, he would act in alignment with this new understanding. And really, when I think about it, I think this trait is so fundamental to living a good life and doing the right thing. Because what that actually means can and should change as you're exposed to more and develop more nuance and wisdom in your thinking and awareness. And I think my dad understood that. I can think of many, many examples of my dad doing this, but I want to talk about two. The first is the concept of jubilee and debt forgiveness. I remember when my dad first started to really dig into and research the concept of Jubilee. I was in school. I was school age. I probably don't really need to explain to this crowd what Jubilee is, and I'm sure there's people far better versed to talk about it. But the concept is an ancient concept that was discussed in Leviticus, and the Jubilee year came every few decades. In those Jubilee years, debts were forgiven, lands that were lost to debt was returned, and slaves were freed. And this concept really resonated with my dad, as well as the fact that this practice has been lost in modern times, and how we view debt and the indebted and the concept of forgiveness and a fresh start. And for my dad, this wasn't purely an intellectual exercise. He realized that he was in a position where people owed him a debt. So he decided to make this a part of his practice. He had his own Jubilee, where if a client had a debt that wasn't paid after a certain number of years, he would forgive that debt and let them know that that debt had been forgiven. And he held on to this concept and this importance to the very end of his life. In his obituary, he asked that people donate to Undo Medical Debt, an organization that pays for others' medical debts and works for structural change to reform the policies that cause the national endemic of medical debt in this country. The second example that's been alluded to a few times before of my dad's dynamism and instinct to learn and grow and challenge and change and then do the right thing was his education about Native American history, the policies and practices that led to the mass theft of land, culture, and extermination, but also the origins of those policies that justified those actions, as well as their present-day effects. Even at a relatively old age, my dad didn't shy away when he was confronted with information that struck a chord with his sense of justice. Instead, he dug in. He read and read on the topic. He would share what he was reading and thinking about. And being the philosopher and intellectually honest person he was, he really extended those concepts to their logical conclusion, even if that meant confronting uncomfortable truths about his beliefs, our collective history, and unpacking that, evolving yet more. And my dad didn't just keep this to himself. I think another part of his commitment to doing the right thing was also voicing when someone else needed to do the right thing too. He did this time and again with his church. And he did that again with this issue. In Madison, he brought this to his church, which was just down the street from the house where I grew up. He talked to church leadership about how doing the right thing, the moral thing, meant giving the land underneath the church back to the tribe that had it, and paying rent to the tribe for using the land. Now, this issue, like many others, didn't necessarily end the way my dad wanted, but he pushed and he fought, and he wasn't afraid of causing some waves to fight for what was right. Toward the end of my dad's life, he very naturally started thinking about his legacy, the impact on the world once he had left it. He poured himself into writing, even more than before, writing essays and poems, short stories. He had so much that he wanted to tell and share. Some of those projects he was never able to finish. But what I told my dad during his last day, and one of the last things I was able to talk to him about, was that I hoped that he saw that how he lived his life was a legacy. While he didn't talk about living your values in a deliberate way to share and impart something on us, I saw him doing these things as a kid. I saw how he acted with his integrity. And I experienced how he encouraged Nathaniel and I to think for ourselves, to debate, to question, to speak truth to power, and to act in accordance with our values. Since he has died, I see in greater and greater depth how much my dad has impacted my professional work, how I try to live my life, and the family environment I'm trying to create for my children. My dad's goodness and integrity and fight to do the right thing, both when that impacted personal decisions, but also to to change things outside of his control, has been deeply imparted onto my brother and myself. And I'm sure that is the case for countless others that were a part of his life and were impacted by his life and his work. The fact that my dad continued to challenge himself and confront uncomfortable truths and saw that as an opportunity to grow through that discomfort until the end is inspiring to me. He demonstrated that part of living a good life and doing the right thing is personal growth and evolution, and that can and should be a continuous part of our lives. Thank you.
So I really miss my dad. I'm not going to skirt around it. It's been hard, and I'm glad that we can be honest about how it's hard, and I know I'm not alone in that. It's been hard for a lot of us, and it's really good to be together. It's really good for the heart to be together, and so I'm just so grateful to each of you for being here and sharing in the love and sharing memories and sharing about who my dad was for you and will continue to be for you. So I'm just eager to hear what you all have to say and share. My dad was a really good man, and I feel so fortunate that he was my father, and I feel so fortunate that our mom was our mother, and that you found each other. And most of all the good things we have to say about Arden Mahlberg need to have Linda Mahlberg credited for the assist. So there are many things that I love and admire about my dad. And what I feel moved to share about here is a strong sense of purpose in just how deeply he cared about what was important to him. And his personality was mostly quite self-contained and under control, but essentially he was a deeply passionate person with an intense sense of purpose. I mean, Arden is related to ardent, fiery, and he wanted to share that fact. He cared so deeply about being a parent to us, about being a parent, being a good parent. He just cared so deeply about being a grandpa to his grandkids, to our kids. He cared so deeply about being a husband to you, Mom. He cared so deeply about his relationships with each of you and all the people that he loved. He cared so deeply about being a therapist and being a good therapist. And he cared so deeply about fairness and integrity and finding a more just and peaceful way of living together. He cared so deeply about spirituality and the spiritual life and with wrestling with ultimate questions and about always learning and being curious and having good conversations and exploring ideas together. And he cared so deeply about basically whatever struck his fancy. I mean, he just got passionate about stuff. And whether it was kayaking or drumming, learning to drum when he was in his 60s, like, I want to learn how to drum. And so he really got into that. And we have tons of drums in our basement. And Mom said, okay, but you need to keep it in the basement. Or more recently, writing poetry and write it. I mean, he lived as fully as he possibly could, even as illness started to close in on the possibilities. And so writing became so important to him. And as an aside, Nora and I were working with him about getting his poetry together to self-publish, which didn't happen before he died. But in due time, we're going to continue that project. And so, if you want to have a copy of that, let us know, or we may just mail it to you anyway. So my dad lived with a lot of purpose and with a good purpose. And one of the many things that I've been reflecting on in a new light since his death is a story that he shared with me about when he was a young man, when he did not feel much purpose for his life. And he was, in fact, in deep despair. So, I mean, he struggled with a lot of things, I think, stemming from the sudden loss of his mother when he was 12, who died suddenly. And there were other hardships. And he told me about a time as a young man when he was feeling acute despair and a sense of meaninglessness about his life. And he was in the bathroom in his apartment or dorm, I forget exactly where, when suddenly he was surrounded by light. And capital L kind of light. And in that light, just clear as a bell, the knowledge dawned that everything is ringing out with meaning. Everything in the cosmos is imbued with meaning and expresses meaning. Everything. And then the light left, and he was back in the bathroom. And he said, well, that answers that. And he also said he was left with this feeling of, thank you. And would you mind being a little more specific? And this is my dad's sense of humor. Meaning like, okay, thank you. I now know that everything is imbued with ultimate meaning. But what's the meaning of my life? I mean, it was a very transpersonal or depersonal experience, which is important. And I think from that point forward, Arden Mahlberg very purposely lived out that question. And this led him to dedicating himself to working for peace, to living in a compassionate way, to living with deep integrity, to living in a way that was deeply respectful of the fact that each and every person is imbued with ultimate meaning and has value and worth and dignity. This led him to become a mental health therapist, and he figured that given his gifts, being a psychologist was the best way that he could help the world become a little bit more peaceful by helping people become a little more sane, which is how he put it. And he truly did that for countless people. And you know, as a kid, you don't have much of a sense of who your parents are outside of being your parent. And Dad would joke that his job isn't exactly the kind of thing that works for take your daughter to work day. But as time went on, I'd really grown to have an appreciation for how deeply he helped countless people. I mean, we have no idea, none of us do, of just how many people he helped to live their best selves. But for years now, I've had this weird knack of randomly running into people who turn out to be former clients of my dad. And not like just hanging out on Monroe Street in Madison, but like in New York City or in Walla Walla, Washington, talking to somebody who's like, oh, you're a Mahlberg? Are you by any chance related to a Dr. Arden Mahlberg? Like, yeah, he's my dad. Well, he was my shrink. And to the person, they really wanted me to know just how much he helped them. Just how much he helped them. And then they may be inclined to overshare about the details of that. But you know, my dad has taught me to be a good listener. So I'm really grateful for all the ways that he taught us to treat other people as people, and by modeling it, not by preaching it at us, but just without judgment. And you just see it, just how he would interact with anybody we passed by. I mean, especially someone who may be dealing with mental health and suffering. Like he just had an unconditional respect for other people's dignity and basic humanity. And it was important to him also to share stories about how this approach to people can be used in disarming ways at times for the sake of nonviolent resolution to conflict. which he was trained in, as Paul shared about, and trained others in, and exercised quite a few times. And I feel like I just need to tell these stories. He'd tell the story about being woken up in the middle of the night, alone in his apartment in Minneapolis, to the sound of someone breaking in to his apartment. And he was alone, and they had gotten in through the door and were starting to walk in. And my dad turned over in his bed to let the person know that someone was there, and also to get a better look at what was going on. And the man stopped, but then he kept going in. And my dad, calm as can be, said, "Excuse me, what are you looking for?" Nothing. And the guy just bolted and left. Calm as can be. Or he'd tell the story about when he was working with a peace group during the Vietnam War to block a munitions train in central Minnesota. And they were getting on the tracks, getting things organized there. And my dad noticed a man skulking around in the woods, spying on them. And so my dad made his way over to him and said, "Hello, my name's Arden. Do you have any questions about what we're doing? What would you like to know?" And the guy was stunned and awkwardly walked away. For some reason, he never wanted to know what his FBI, because you can get your FBI files these days. But I'm curious to see what they have to say about Arden Mahlberg. Treat people in a way that honors their humanity and honors your own humanity. And that can have some powerful and unexpected consequences. So now the last thing I want to say about my dad's purpose is that it contributed to an intensity about doing things that he would apply to really anything. When Arden Mahlberg set his mind on doing something, get out of the way, it's going to get done, and it's going to get done well. And he had this intense focus on studying how things worked and how they could work better, and researching all about it, and researching finding out who the experts are and what they have to say, and then being willing to change his approach to improve. And he applied this to big, important things like how to be a really good therapist, or how to be a good person, how to live with integrity. But this was his approach to basically everything. And there's a value passed down in his family. He'd quote his father before him: "If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And use the right tool for the right job," right? Grandpa Mahlberg would say that. And at times, my dad modified this a little bit to say, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. But still, he could get pretty intense about this. And it could even be intimidating sometimes. And if we're honest, he could sometimes be irritating about this, because he did seem to apply to everything. But overall, this is a very admirable quality of his, without a doubt. And it could even be endearing. So last story I'll tell, which is a story that's been told and retold in our family. And I've even gotten confused because I thought I was there. But it turns out, thank you, Aunt Mavis, for telling this story last night. I have to rewrite my eulogy because I wasn't there, I guess. So my dad wanted to make himself another washtub bass, because he hadn't been playing in a few years. And a local theater group in Madison was putting on a production that called for a washtub bass player, and he got really excited about this, because then he could pick up playing the washtub bass like in the jug band days. And so he went to the local hardware store, and he spent a long time. And if you've ever been shopping with my dad, you know it could be a long time picking up one galvanized tub after the other and tapping on the bottom of it. Boom, boom, boom. next to his ear to assess the acoustical qualities of that tub and rating them against each other so that he could pick the best one. And you'd think he was in a violin shop in Vienna, not in the middle of Menards. In a hardware store, a worker came over to him and was puzzled, like, can I help you, sir? Like, dun, dun, dun. But what this means is that if you've ever received a gift from Arden Mahlberg, you can be sure, whatever it was, whatever it is, it's the best darn one of those things that was on the shelf. And he had researched and examined all the alternatives. And that's how much he cared. He just deeply cared about everything. He cared about life this way. He had this intensity and this purpose. That's how he cared for us. I mean, he really wanted to do the best for us. And that's how he cared about this world. He worked so hard and so earnestly to help people be the best versions of ourselves and to help our world be the best version of itself, as hard as that is. Just a more sane and just and peaceful place. So another saying of our grandpa's, which my dad was fond of repeating, was, wherever you go, leave that place a little bit better than when you found it. Wherever you go, leave that place a little bit better than when you found it. And that's what my dad has done his entire life. And that's what he's done with his entire life. And he's left this world a better place than when he found it. And so, Dad, you've done well. You've done well. You can rest now. We love you, and we're so grateful for you. And we'll take it from here.
Thank you both. I have one final remembrance from a book group member. They say, one particular reading compelled us to talk in a very deep way about our own passing. Arden talked about a meeting with a pastor at a new congregation he was attending since moving to Michigan. He said he didn't think she realized it, but he was really interviewing her for his own passing. I really appreciated our ability to talk with each other in this deep, vulnerable way. Well, apparently I passed that interview because Arden returned for more conversations. He was able to be vulnerable and open in the way his book club colleagues recall. Over a year ago, as we talked about this eventual service, he left me with the music for a chant he had written on a text by Rumi. Let me read the text to you first. Something opens my wings. Something makes sadness and hurt disappear. Someone pours a cup in front of me. All I taste is sacredness. Something opens my wings. Now, in a moment, I will invite you into a ritual of sadness and gratitude. It is an embodiment of this text and of what Arden truly wanted you all to experience. Something makes sadness and hurt disappear. He believed that sacred something is gratitude. When I invite you to come forward to the table, you can bring your stone and let it carry all the sadness you are holding right now, all that has been gathered during this service, sadness for Arden's death, for the death of others, recent or long past, any sadness you carry. You can set the stone into the bowl of water and release the sadness. Let it be washed away. Then receive a flower representing the sacred practice of gratitude. Let this bloom hold all the things you are grateful for. May it remind you to practice gratitude every day. So take a few breaths together. Just center your mind, find some stillness, and listen first to the chant that Arden wrote. Something opens my wings. Something opens my wings. Something makes sadness and hurt disappear. Someone opens up in front of me. All I taste is sacredness. Something opens my wings. Something opens my wings. Something makes sadness and hurt disappear. Someone pours a cup in front of me. All I taste is sacredness. Something opens my wings. As you feel ready, please come forward to the end of the table to place your stone. Leave space for those in front of you, and there's no need to rush. grief and sadness have no timeline, no point at which we say it's over. How we each experience grief is highly individual and changes over time. Even though our ritual encouraged us to leave sadness behind and focus on gratitude, I know you are still going to be carrying that sadness. It didn't just magically disappear when you put the stone in the water, but it represents a process of letting go, and in Arden's mind, replacing it with gratitude. Hold on to that and return to it when you need to. I like to think about grief as something that isn't necessarily replaced. Imagine the grief and sadness you are feeling just stays the same, but life grows again around it. The idea that we begin to grow around our grief, that our world and our life and connections with family and community expands, cushioning that grief makes sense to me. We start to expand our focus perhaps towards gratitude, or on working for justice, or on being in peace in nature, or on doing the right thing. We return to our grief whenever we need to, or it returns to you. You'll find yourself holding that stone again, often at the most unexpected times. Maybe when you are walking along the river in Dexter, or when you start humming a song that Arden wrote, or pick up a book he had bookmarked and notated. The grief returns. But it's okay, because there's more life around us to return to when we are ready, to catch us when we feel we are falling, to embrace us and to hold us up. Many Unitarian Universalists approach death with a sense of wonder and hold varied beliefs about what happens to one's body or soul after death. This faith makes room for each of us to hold different personal or theological understandings of what happens after someone dies. However, one thing I am certain of is that after death, someone whom we have known and loved and spent time with remains with us in our hearts, in our memories, in our stories, and in our songs. For our closing prayer, we'll once again hear Arden's words in his recasting of the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father who art in heaven. So if you would please join me in the spirit of prayer. Mama, Papa, we are totally dependent on you. When we call your name, may we only call it out of love. May we adopt your way of universal love as our way of daily living. May we ensure that none of us goes hungry. As your love for us remains steadfast despite our failings, may our love for each other be equally unbroken, even when others' actions harm or disappoint. We acknowledge how unstable our love really is and pray that it will not be tested to the point of breaking, that we will not be controlled by selfish motives and self-serving blinders that lead us to cause harm. This world belongs to you, not to us for our taking. It is infused with your love and beautified by your radiance, as it always was and forever will be. This is so true. I extinguished the flame, but not the light of love that lived in Arden and now continues to live on in each of you. Go now in peace, my friends, holding in your hearts the utmost gratitude that you are alive and present in the world, and can continue Arden's legacy of working for justice and peace. So let us sing one more time. The words to this are in the order of service. If you're not familiar, you'll pick it up quickly. Otherwise, just sit and take it in. The family invites you to join them in the social hall just outside the sanctuary doors and to the right for a reception. And all are also welcome to the Mahlbergs' home after the reception. If you would all just remain in your seats a moment longer so the family may exit first and be ready to greet you.